Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and want to make sure we got some thoughts out on these introductory press conferences for all the coordinators on this team, two of them being new in the OC and DC, and then also from special teams coordinator Heath Farwell, who was retained with the Jaguars after having the team obviously wasn't good, but a strong season for special teams. And, I appreciate that was considered, right? It wasn't just let's get rid of everyone because we had a bad season, but there was some objective thinking involved, right? And he's been someone who's done very well with really his body of work here and deserved to stay, right? Jacksonville had at least a top 10 special teams unit, arguably top 5 this year, and those are the kind of people you keep around even if maybe things didn't go so well in other areas of the team. But want to get into some thoughts here. This was, starting with the OC, this was the first time we've ever heard him speak. At least, unless someone found a video I could not find. Because usually when we look at candidates or look at a guy who gets hired, look at a guy who gets hired, you're trying to find videos about, what's this guy think? How does this guy operate, right? And there's nothing out there. So it was interesting listening to Grant Udinski for the first time. He started out by saying, the normal things, and I'll quote him here. This is a phenomenal opportunity to work with the guys here, the organization here. Not enough words to say how fired up I was to work with Cohen. And this was something he also said for Trevor Lawrence as well in this quote. Beyond fired up to work with Trevor. Like I said about Liam, not enough words to express my excitement. As far as the relationship, it takes time. This is a collaborative process. There is no dictatorship. So I love that quote. Personally, I think the dictatorship part is a little bit pointed because, I don't know. Last couple of years, I feel like you've had two guys just power struggling in this building. They don't feel like they got to answer questions to the media. They don't feel like they got to elaborate. They just do wherever the hell they want. And it got them fired, right? Obviously, I'm talking about Trent Baalke. I'm talking about Doug Peterson. Two people we don't got to worry about anymore, right? That's a good thing. But, you got two people who just did whatever the hell they wanted until it eventually got them fired. But these were the two big reasons, ultimately, that someone like Grant Udinski took this job. Even without the play calling side of it, which I think he said was not really a factor to him. You got to keep in mind as well, Udinski was someone that technically was taking a little bit bigger of a jump than most people. He was an assistant quarterbacks coach, and then he was an assistant in another position as well. So he is not coming straight up from just being a position coach. He's coming up from being an assistant positions coach, and I think that kind of factors in a little bit here too. But it's really good for Jacksonville to land this kind of guy that, you feel like has a lot of potential. There's a lot of good things that have been said about him. And so ultimately, I think that's a big win. But the two big reasons, right? Liam Cohen and Trevor Lawrence. I think Liam Cohen, as far as a lot of the guys he's brought in, very similar thinking here, right? Young, energetic, innovative minds that want to win the game off coaching and are willing to think outside of the box, right? They're willing to change things with this team. And I feel like as well, one of the emphasis that this team has had is being able to respond in any way, be able to do anything, right? We want to have a strong run game. We want to have a strong passing game. We also want to be able to respond to opposing offenses in any way we need to, right? And we'll kind of get into that with the defensive scheme as well, which we feel like we're hearing a little bit more about at this point, because that was a pretty big question, right? Everyone wants to know 3-man front, 4-man front. What are we doing exactly? But yeah, love this quote. It's kind of funny to me too with everything that was going on this morning regarding Trevor Lawrence and the supposedly BS rumor or report, quote unquote, that the Steelers actually called the Jaguars and tried to trade for him, offered a first and second round pick as if that would ever get accepted when you take $100 million cap hit and give up your first overall pick from years ago you just extended. I don't know. One of the dumbest things I've ever heard, but Turns out not to be true. If it was, I would have recorded a video on it, just mocking the Steelers. But it's kind of funny this came at the same time because you heard that, like, gosh, an hour, I think, before the press conferences that was getting around. So, yeah, load of crap. Jaguars aren't trading Trevor Lawrence. Don't worry about it if for some reason you still are. One other quote from Grant Udinski here, just on the run game. You know, we want to be a complete offense. We want to have the ability to attack defenses in every way. We want to take those tools and fit them to the players. We never want to become one-dimensional. Preach it. Like, this is arguably the most important thing on offense, is being able to do everything, right? This team, for years, under Doug Peterson, was just built to be able to throw the ball, which they didn't even have a great game plan in that regard. And then the run game is just like, we don't give a crap. Like, every offensive lineman we bring in, don't care what you do in the run game, can you protect the quarterback? And then they're still questionable in that regard. But they don't do anything in the run game. So you have all these additions that just completely ignore it, and then you're trying to throw running backs back there and tell them to go succeed. You put Tank Bigsby in, like, one of the worst situations imaginable for a rookie, and then, of course, he didn't have a great year, right? He fumbled the ball at times rookie season. He got better last year, of course. That's great. But they have set their running backs up to fail. They've set this team up to basically every game have the run get stopped and be forced to pass. And I'm glad that anyone with a mind is able to come in here and see that and to be willing to change that. And so that's a big that's a big emphasis. Right? This team is probably going to attack the trenches in free agency. Probably going to see a big signing in some regard there, one of the top players. And you're probably going to see people get added to this backfield. So I'm happy. I think this is what needs to happen. And I think everything we've heard so far from the coaches is showing that they understand a lot of the problems that have been here. Now, getting to the defensive side of this whole conversation and the press conference and what was said. Just the first thing from Anthony Campanile that I had here was that they aren't really focusing on the issues right now. They're more so just working on player evaluation, which totally understand that. There's not a lot of time until we get into free agency, until we get into the draft and all these things. And they got to know what they're working with, how they want the scheme to look, and do all their work to get ready for the season, right? And just a reminder here, because I think people easily forget this, the offseason is a time for the coaching staff to give input to where the front office is going to adjust the roster to fit what they want to do schematically, right? That's your time for the players to be molded, the roster to be molded to what the coaches want to do. Whereas when you get into the season, you start playing games, that is when the coaches have to mold to what they got. Because they might not get everything they want. You might not be able to overhaul everything quickly. And right after, a few years, you should be fine because you'll be able to have built the roster the way you want it. But if you haven't had that, right, because this is first year for all these guys on offense and defense in this scheme, you're probably not going to be set up perfectly. And that's the time then during the season for these coaches to start molding it to the players and what their strengths are until they get everything they want in the future. So totally understand, they're trying to look at what do we need, what fits schematically. And that was something as well that he felt like was pretty good as far as just how the players fit. He's not far off. And we'll get to that quote here in a second. One of the things he mentioned very specifically for this defense is violence, right? We're shooting for a violent finish in a tackle or violently taking the ball away. That's the vision every play. And that's great. I think everything starts in the trenches, of course. But I think it starts with physically dominating opponents, punching their teeth in, getting them to a point where they don't want to play you, right? And this fits along with that general line of thinking, right? And you want to see that violence. You want to see this team be able to defeat the will of your opponents to where they just don't want to play games against you. Teams don't want to come into Jacksonville. That's the ultimate goal. that you want to pull off. So love that quote from Anthony Campanile. Couple more from him. He just quickly talked about Armstead, mentioned the leadership aspect. He's the, maybe there's a player that's been mentioned as well that I haven't caught on to, but he's the second guy that I know of on defense who's been mentioned as a leader on this team by this current coaching staff, because you heard Liam Cohen come in and say, Trevor Lawrence, Josh Hines-Allen. Now you hear Eric Armstead. So it's important, something to consider. As someone who might be a captain this next year. I don't know if he was in 2024. I can't recall, honestly, but obviously Walter Payton Man of the Year. And that does play a big role in that. And that's just the guy that he's consistently been. The quote that might concern people is probably the last one. And it's on the position. He says, he's a problem wherever he goes. It's good to have guys who are a good matchup wherever they go. And I'm just going to be honest. Well, this could be interpreted as he's going to maybe play edge too much again. And we're all going to go crazy over that. I wouldn't worry about it because Armstead made it very clear what he wants to be, what he wants to play. And this may be something where when we get into the scheme in a moment, which not going to go too crazy on that, but it's a simple way of describing it. You're going to have different fronts, right? It's not just going to be a 4-man front. It might be a 3-man front, right? And so if you're splitting time in all of these looks, a lot of the people on the front are going to be changing positions. So he might be lined up in a couple different spots. So that's very possible, and that might be part of what the quote is. And you see it here when he talks about the defense. What I want with this defense is a pretty good fit. We have some really good pieces in place to fit the scheme. Really what you have right now is a team that was built to be a 3-4 that's had one offseason of transferring to a 4-3 with man coverage instead of zone. So you kind of have a mix, right? You have guys who can do different things. And that's, I think, part of where he feels like things fit in pretty well to his scheme. Because it sounds like, based off some other quotes he had from this press conference, things he said before, and his whole background, he wants to be multiple. He wants to be able to do different things. This is not a team that's just a 4-man front all the time, or a 3-man front all the time, or only 2 linebackers. They're always got a nickel on the field. It's going to change. The types of coverages they run, they're going to change. So if you want that, you're going to be looking for players who are capable of having versatility, capable of playing different positions and moving around where necessary. And so I can see where this defense does fit pretty well with the scheme. Now, a couple things from Heath Farwell. So just kind of talking about how he retained here. He said that the cons were a big factor in him staying with the team, and actually told him at the end of the year they wanted him to remain in Jacksonville, which was a little surprising they were that clear to him right at the end of the season, unless maybe this meant like after Cohen was hired, but it made sense, right? I mean, Heath Farwell, he had a good year. This was not someone who was a part of the problems here, and you don't get rid of people just for the sake of getting rid of people. You got to have a good reason. So totally understand that. The last thing as well, just crediting the players, right? And this is good from him. Just saying, we're not going to be back. We would not have been back here if they didn't play as well as they did. And that's fair. It's honest. Like, totally get it. And that is the reason he's here, right? If they struggled, well, he's not going to be here, right? He's going to be gone with Doug Peterson, Press Taylor, and Ryan Nielsen. But they did well on special teams. They're going to run it back. I know he talked about some things he wants to tweak, but ultimately, they've got a lot that they can work from, and they're going to have some continuity there, which is good. So that's all we got here. Just some quick thoughts from these press conferences, and ultimately, I'm excited. I like the young side of the staff. I like the energetic, innovative mindset. I hope they stick with that with the GM search. I know there's kind of some scares going on there because I didn't record a video on it, but there are a couple more candidates. John Robinson was thrown in, and he is a terrible candidate. He was the guy who basically destroyed the Titans. So I don't want him here, right? And that's a little scary, but I'm gonna, let it play out, see what happens. Hopefully, you get someone like a James Gladstone or a Brandon Brown or just some other younger guy that's come up in a good system and could be here for a long time. I think ideally would be a good fit. A little shocked they never talked to Ray Agnew. That was surprising to me, but this is where we are. But ultimately, I still got a lot of hope for that. And we'll see what happens. And of course, Ian Cunningham, another name you could throw out there, but there's just constantly rumors about whether he'd even want this job. And I'm kind of leaning against him taking it. I don't think that's going to happen just based off everything I hear, and a lot of you guys hear those same things. So with that all said, I appreciate you watching. Want to shout out our channel members really quick. Premier Desir 904, Nightmare Eco, Gator John Bites, Scrubber Ducky 500, Fran G's, and Brian Foster. Thank you all for watching and supporting this channel. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.